I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Charles Gwathmey, someone that I have personally had a great respect for. Mr. Gwathmey has studied architecture at the University of Pennsylvania and at Yale, where he received his master's degree in 1962. Upon graduating, he studied a year in Paris under the Fulbright grant. In 1970, he received the Arnold Brunner Prize from the National Institute of Arts and Letters. He has been teaching architecture since 1964 at numerous colleges, including Pratt, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Harvard, Cooper Union, and he's presently involved in the program at UCLA. Over the past 10 years, he, with his partner Bob Siegel, have been responsible for the design of many fine private residences, as well as a number of important larger-scale projects which have been widely publicized. A special publication in 1972 called Five Architects featured his work related to its association with what has become known as the New York School, and which in turn generated what happened last spring at UCLA, which was the the white, gray, silver conference, which I think many of us appreciated as really instigating kind of a high level of discussion in which I understand he's going to continue in terms of some sort of discussion tonight. With that brief introduction, Charles Gwathmey.
I'd like to clarify some things before I show the work. To talk about the New York Five for a second, the New York School, so-called. It's really not a school. It's five architects who have a concern for building, who believe that architecture is a formal rather than a specific process. And we talk a lot and we all teach. We also fight a lot and disagree a lot. And the fact that we've been identified is a little bit unrealistic because we proceed with different energies and different degrees of purpose and have a different idea about architecture in general. I think what happened last spring here was terrific, especially for the participants, especially for me, and that I learned a lot about not only what I was doing and being able to reinterpret it somehow and reevaluate the work, but I sort of confirmed and some preconceptions that I had about other people's work, and it clarified for me the basic differences in approach to architecture as a building and an art form. I think what I'd like to try to talk about tonight is to show 6 diverse projects, all built, one in fact now under construction, different references, different programs, different budgets, different users, and to try to prove that despite the differences and between the particular programs and the particular buildings, there's a constant reference to a process. And that to me is very important, only in that it, I think, distinguishes what are or have been called the formalists, which I am not, but which I've been called, and the so-called gray architects, of which you know Charles Moore is the primary exponent after Bob Venturi. Charles Moore has taken on this role, and I'm not sure whether he appreciates it or not, but that's beside the point. There is a very definite approach to that school of architecture, which I think is different, very different from mine, very different from ours in general. And I don't want to make a value judgment. It's not about that. It's to really try to show you all that architecture for me is a general practice, that what we deal with are the universal ingredients that determine form. By universal ingredients, I mean a site that has restraints or has restrictions or has pressures, orientation, sunshine, program, how a building is made, how long it's supposed to last, how much it costs, and that to sort of define architecture as a more available and general reference rather than a specific reference. Our buildings meaning my partners and myself and the New York 5 buildings have been called everything, except most particularly they've been called elitist. I'd like to clarify that. Elitist to me means that they're unavailable for anyone, everyone, except for a very specific few. And the elitist tag is a stylistic one. It's not a process one. If I can prove or if I can discuss a notion of architectural as a general art rather than a specific one, I would say that our buildings are much more available in the references of choice than others. Others being taking notations, signage, traditional forms, and assembling them to make everybody feel very secure about their past and their future, but really not always answering the other issues. And finally, to try to discuss the idea that there's no difference to me between a house and a dormitory or a building at Princeton, simply because a house responds to all the same issues that any complex work responds to: circulation, light, privacy, sequence of spaces, volumes, and that the issue of specificity, again, is that I think that a house is eternal, and it's proven day after day that those houses which we refer to historically, Georgian houses, Pompeian houses, courthouses, are all available today to respond directly to many kinds of users. And if these buildings are not as specific as others, then theoretically they too should be able to respond not only today but tomorrow to a different user. To make it simple, a family with 2 children or 3 children can use a house that we designed for another family for 3 children 10 years from now, and it would work for them, because the issues addressed are not the issues of bedspreads, chairs, and sort of texture notations, but the issues of, again, site and so forth. Okay, I talk better when the slides are on. It's hard to do this. I'd like to talk about each building in terms of its constraints, and that any problem, any set of givens are, I think, positive parameters from which to go. I think the most obvious one, of course, and it always will be, is budget. But I also think that issues like the program, issues like the site, and issues like the type of construction, the user, what kind of building it is today and what kind of building it may be when they renovate it, all affect how you approach a problem. And the interesting thing is that on a general level, all these problems are approached the same way, and that they're about making spaces that respond to a set of givens, and yet each building is specific in that it responds to the user or to the program. Am I supposed to do this now? These together, right? Okay. This is going from very small to very large to small again. And this is I'm going to move. This is a barn. We all know about barns. The roots of American architecture are barns, right? They have pitched roofs and they make a big space, which traditionally was to store bulk and to store animals and so forth. And there are architects using that symbol today over and over again in making buildings of all kinds. The interesting thing about this was that by the way, the left-hand slide is the original and the right-hand slide is the new. And the game here, or the strategy, was to take a program that was for children who were going to move into what was given as a potential volume. That building on the left had floors horizontally on 3 levels, and as you'll see in the next slide, it drops down a level. So it's a traditional section, and that the lower level was the level for the animals that exited on grade, and the upper level, just back again, was the so-called front level, which also exited on grade. So you had two conditions of grade access. The other thing that's interesting about this, from a formal point of view, is that it reads as a big volume, which is denoted by the roof, with an attached smaller volume on the right-hand side, when in fact it wasn't an addition, it was built that way. And that posed a series of confrontations in the design to say, at one time, is that an outside wall as it runs through the building? I'm talking about this line through here. As it runs through the building, what happens to it to accommodate extension or closure or whatever? Just to get an idea of scale, the doors are 10 feet high. So that makes a man about that high. And the issue here was to take what on the left-hand side appeared to be a normal scale reference and to change the scale completely, not to really deal with the outside as a form-making issue, but to disguise the outside as a scale building and have the whole inside react in a very much different way. Okay. That's the lowest elevation, the back side. And just briefly through plan, the left-hand slide is the lowest elevation. That's that full grade, lower grade elevation, where you see that the demising of the space goes from the back wall, which is closed because it's below grade, is the service line, then there's a circulation line, then an intermediate storage line, which is specific to the spaces, and then the rooms, which in that case are bedrooms and guest rooms. And then the break, which is where the stairs coming down, is the playroom for the children. And the stair, as you read it from the first floor, this is that entrance door with the height here, and this is the glass block, actually takes this floor and drops through the space so that you come into the major volume, and this floor actually drops down and connects you with this space. There are a lot of punctures in this wall, which you'll see, and so the intent here is to re-express this circulation line, which exists below, to drop you past that wall and through into another major volume, which is 20 feet high, and then have you work back into the series of chambers. The main floor is simply entrance, kitchen, and a space, which, for a better word, is living dining, but it has a building in it, which is a separate building. It's a building that's called a cabinet, but it has a sofa, shelves, tables, all one thing, and it really is an object in space to bring the scale back down again. as you go up the building, the idea is that the space rides through. The first level is a master bedroom suite with a bath. Now you can readily read the end wall and the entire volume of the building, which is basically a 30-foot square. And then above that, one level is a study at the top, which again looks back down into the main space. The sections should clarify that. These are the rooms below the main space with the stacked building in it, taken from both sides. This is the playroom with the stair coming through that wall and the glass block notation there. The scale again, this is 35 feet high and 30-foot square, and this is the furniture in it. And as you'll see in the slides, all the windows, or all the new openings, since there was no view on the site, and the idea was to get light into the building and to control privacy, but to still get visual extension out, a lot of trees, is that all the windows are placed so that no matter where you are, from the outside you have privacy, yet you have extension of sky, trees, or ground, depending, and they're all a little bit out of scale. In other words, this window is 6 foot off the floor, but it's 4 foot 6 inches high. So that as you're standing in this room, the cabinet is 6 foot high, the top of the fireplace is 6 foot high. As you're sitting down, you're on the level of the hearth, so that everything is up in terms of the surrounds, and then the objects in the space bring you back down again. It's a thing like that. That's the sort of scale at night, which is diminutive. It reads very, very small. And this is the glass block wall showing on the end wall of the building a giant photo mural, which is 20 feet high and 30 feet long, which is simply to say that you're taking this end wall and you're moving it past itself, and instead of it being white like the container, it's an object that's totally out of scale. This man is 18 feet high, as you'll see inside, standing at the bottom of the stairs, which is a pretty wild thing. And that's a device which I think is interesting, because it's taking photography as another art form and changing its dimension and using it as an architectonic or an architectural reference. There he is at the entrance. And you really pass through this wall, which as you'll see in other slides, is sometimes the end wall of the major part of the building and sometimes not. Right now it's obviously not. So we're standing at the entrance looking right and looking left, and there's that sort of building floating in the space with the stair obviously going up, and the nature of the volume. The only other interesting thing I should say is that when you analyze a volume like this, which is a traditional form, a pitched roof that is symmetrical tends to have a center axis down, and could, in fact, make the space static. In other words, make it centroidal. And what I did was by throwing the circulation to the left of center, and setting up an obvious movement system through the building, and to throw all the major spaces to the right of center, is that you no longer feel that static line. And that major window up at the top, which is again 10 foot 6 high, is centered. The left, this line is the center line of the building, and that's thrown over, so that the whole notion of that centralized space is really broken. Now we're taking a trip where we're going down the stairs, and this is a railing, which again is the floor of the wall thickness painted white rather than being a railing. Nobody's going to walk on the white. If they did, I'd kill them, but I mean, they wouldn't anyway. It's a 7 foot wide stair, right? So, and that's it coming through. And here's that wall I'm talking about, and there's the photo mural. And you can see opposite this glass block facade, which is really a light giver and a privacy wall, because you do see images through it. They're distorted obliquely, and they're not distorted as you face it. But that's the only part of the site which was really open to the road, and to use glass block again, which I love because of its density, was the device to make that room feel like really a space which is coming from the outside up and back outside again. And there's the lower, that window that you see there is down where I'm standing here. It's all the way across the other side. So you come down against the glass block and the site extends out that way. This is the stair looking back, and here's that wall, which you can see is treated in this case like an outdoor or an in wall of a building, because it has windows and doors in it that reveal other spaces beyond. And looking back up or looking down this corridor, which is that roof, is the beginning of the storage units, and on the other side the storage units with lights over the top, and that's going back upstairs again to the major space. So you're going from a 20-foot high volume into a 35-foot high volume, and all the other spaces are modulating around it. These are the this is the level of specificity which is really programmatic. The building could have done without these, I think, and that you could, or one could have accommodated beds and chairs in many different ways. We actually designed these things as a part of the program, but in essence they tend to reinforce and juxtapose the volume. They become very much richer in their texture and color, and they break down in scale so that the spaces they're in are made on one scale and a reference to the organization of the building, the outside, and the light. And this is really accommodation, right? Sleeping drawers under desks and all that kind of business. Oh, that's a shame. Well, we're back upstairs again, looking down. And if that photograph is flipped, it's standing here looking the other way. We'll get another one of it. But it's beginning to see that piece of furniture or that building. Now the other interesting thing about it is that the center, this sofa, by the way, is about 15 feet long in that dimension and about 8 feet long in that dimension. And it really makes a room. It makes a space which is oriented to the fireplace where you're sitting, accommodates those chairs, and at the other end around it, it's a table, which is a 7-foot diameter table. And this is where you dance on the other side, you know. So it really demises and modulates the space, yet you really, at the same time, feel the whole volume. And these are various angles of it. You can see the fireplace and the scale of that. And it really becomes very intimate on the living room side. And the other interesting thing formally is that the truss, which is the original truss with its tie rods, is bisecting the space exactly in half. And that's only interesting to me because the space is divided by its section, its peak roof, but it's also divided the other way by its main structure. And yet in the room, because of the modulation of this piece of furniture and because it's an entire volume that is asymmetrical on itself, you don't feel the break. That's another incident in the space to give it some scale. This is the kitchen. This is looking from the dining room to the kitchen and starting to feel the tower as it goes up. Now the interesting thing here is that there's a pocket door in here, a mirror door, which is 10'6" high and 7 feet wide, that closes and reflects diagonally the image of the big window we saw on the end wall. So that you have the option of looking through the space. This is back into the playroom and back into the playroom. Or you can close it down and the whole space reflects back in on itself. And there should be a slide of that, which there isn't. But I'm sorry, this door should be a mirror and it reflects the whole space back. And that's looking down at the object, which is designed also obvious to see from above, and it's really a spectacular way to see an oriental rug, which is really a painting. And you see it from above and it reads as a painting. Okay, there's a study at the top, looking back down. So that's a tower and a building that's really in this pavilion. This is another thing that I think the difference also, again, in reference to sort of history, is that much of Corbusier's early work, had to do with designing specific buildings, yet implying prototypicality. By that I mean that when he designed a house like the Villa Gauche or the Villa Stein, the Villa Meyer, he designed them as objects that were directional, that had all the fantastic amenities and volumetric context that his work did, yet on the bigger sense they were buildings that were two-sided. They all had side walls, either in fact or by implication, and they had an urban characteristic. In other words, you could theoretically take that model and you could slip it into a slot in the city context and the building would be legitimate because it was responding to that, and it was also responding to north and south, the notion of entrance and the notion of privacy, and the buildings really worked front to back in terms of light and circulation, and side to side in terms of space. And this is a house we did, just finished, on the beach, on a dune in Long Island. And the context here was, as only showing two is sort of silly, but these houses run for 30 miles that way and 100 miles that way all the way to New York. And they're really linear. The ocean, and because people have developed it that way, have lined up buildings across its face. And that what's interesting, very much like Malibu, is that each and every building is designed as a three-dimensional and 360-degree object, not notating privacy or not regarding neighbors and things like that. And the exercise here, not to the subjugation of the client, was to try to do a prototype, to say that this was a building that was basically a section rather than a plan, and to have it respond as a volumetric and transparent layering of spaces to the ocean, rather than the typical turning it parallel to the ocean. You have all rooms or all spaces face it the same way. Also, the site slopes severely. There was a big depression, then it levels off. And the zoning ordinance there was that a building couldn't be more than 2.5 stories high. So the ground floor is actually sunk in the ground a half a level. So when you enter, as you can see by the model, you're coming up the drive into a court, and the building begins at that point, yet the floor level is really 4 feet down from grade, and the building rises up that way. Also being a beach house, and also having a requirement where there were two teenage daughters and the parents wanted to be separate, and yet having the intensity of the view and that whole extension of the ocean, circulation became a real organizing device. Circulation, on one hand, being an exterior system, which is the straight run stair that goes up to the main level, continues out across a bridge to the beach, has a number 6, which is a shower changing room, in its way, both front to back. And you can continue around outside and go up to the upper deck and the master bedroom level, so that any time you come into the house from the beach or from a car, you can get to any level in the building without going inside. There's an internal circulation system, of a circular stair, which does that job, which is obviously a climatic situation, and really a direct in-house thing. So there's the different scales of vertical movement, and by their nature they separate and characterize the use of the building. Ground floor is simply 2 children's rooms, a playroom in the middle, a guest suite at the other end. First level is living, dining, kitchen, and the idea here again to be clear about is that these walls are very consciously closed. They have openings in them, as you'll see in the photographs, but the openings are really light sources and peak views. In other words, they're oblique views of the ocean, and no neighbors or anyone passing by can ever invade the privacy of the spaces. They also obviously become air sources as well. And the idea was, again, that the inside and the outside really are the same conceptually, and that you're looking through transparencies to outside walls, so that when you're in this space, you're really defining it by this edge and by that wall, and every particular space has a unique kind of view, as well as obviously the main view of the living room. This is the upper floor. Living room and deck run through master bedroom and study, balcony, and upper deck, and the section should be clear. You can see how these spaces start layering from the back to the front as they get higher. It's the model and the actual building. The presentation of the building from the entrance is very much a cube and very much a painting in a way, and which also describes the site. This is the access place. Those lower windows on that elevation, these windows are the two children's bedrooms. This is the dining room, kitchen, master bedroom up there. This is that oblique window from the dining room, and that end thing here is just a slot, an open slot on the deck, which is a sit-down sort of. It's not only durable material in terms of this particular location, but it's a very easy material to work with. It's a cold material, and it's self-finishing. And the idea of that, again, like the barn before, except wood this time, is to make an enclosure or a reference for the specifics of the next. And so forth, which is in fact peculiar to the client, but the building itself is not particularly peculiar to these clients, but very peculiar to the site. In other words, someone else could come in here and live and have a good time, and it would work. You know, so the whole notion that architecture or architects are really not accommodating clients, they're imposing, willfully imposing a certain lifestyle or certain aesthetic. It's a wild shot on the left, that's a fog, but it's interesting because it's at night and you really can see the volumetric layering as you go back. The living room, this cabinet, which is also a fireplace, demising the space between the living and the dining. And when you're at the dining table, you see over and through it and out the side, massive bedroom at the top and the upper deck there. It's just a detail of that entrance and outside circulation system. This is looking up the circular stair and seeing the fireplace and that wall of the master bedroom. And again, starting to describe that cabinet, which again is a small building. It makes a sofa, fireplace, book storage, and so forth, which is an incident in the space. And in this case, white. In other words, the wood is the overall reference, whereas in the barn, the white was the reference, and the smaller buildings or the cabinets were the wood. This is reversed. Conceptually the same idea, except the white in the cabinets really helps these buildings reflect and bring a lot of light into the spaces. It's a very, very glary situation. By having white incidents rather than a white building, they tend to be, in these sites, quiet. This is a more accurate condition, again, from the study looking down to the living room. And again, very much designing these things from all points of perception. This is the kitchen coming through. The cabinet runs all the way across the back dining table, and this is the back of the fireplace with storage and looking out to the ocean. And there's that tall window again, which gets an oblique view on that line. And you can see the skylight up at the top there, the cut in the roof rather, that even from this position allows you another segment view. And this is front to back, from the deck looking in and from the inn looking out. And this is the whole notion again of extending the space to the outside and then extending it further to the view and using the walls and the planes and the glass to all sort of make transparencies and extensions and closures at the same time. Okay, one more house. This is a project. This is a huge program. This is on a site which is not dissimilar from an ocean site, except it has a view of New York City. It's on a bluff, a palisade, a sheer drop, and 40 miles away is the New York City skyline. It faces south again. The view is south. And there's again, in this case, a very real problem of a road which is immediate, so that access and the organization of the building in terms of layers of privacy is away from the road. And the whole organization of this building, therefore, is something a little different from the last one in saying that the whole notion of privacy in view is coming from that, but the program is complex. There is a terrific view over the road on this side, and how to cope with psychologically the notion of people looking in, and also, again, neighbors, very, again, on a line. So this is a wall building as well, at least the side walls, much more so than some others, and it's just interesting to see the differences. This one you entered a half level down by cars. It's funny to show this plan first. So this is the garage, and the whole children's makeup, 2 children's rooms, bath, playroom. This is the storage, this is the laundry thing, which access outside. And the idea here was to leave the site rough and to develop areas in the building, decks and terraces and extensions that were places that kept changing your reference to the edge and also to the view. I mean, as you move out from the house, the sky becomes bigger, the view becomes greater, and also the slope obviously becomes greater. So when you're out on that thing, which is really a reinterpretation of a gazebo, you're past the building, you look back to it, but you're also participating on a much bigger scale, and it becomes an extension by a ramp, obviously, from the outside. So that, again, prototypically, this could be, at least conceptually, an urban building. This could be a wall and a wall, and the building relates front to back. There was only one great programmatic requirement, which was a greenhouse that was built into the building, and we used it as a device for layering that front facade. In other words, when you approach the building as a visitor or as a user, you approach the greenhouse. And the greenhouse is described in plan here. You actually enter it and you circulate in it. And this is the greenhouse wall, and it goes up and over, as you'll see. And this is the kitchen. It works back through dining, living, sitting, and that kind of thing, all this powder room and stuff like that. But the idea here is to take an element like a greenhouse, which is unique in the building, to use its reflectivity, and its texture, which is plants and so forth, and to make that the screen between the road and the spaces in the building, and have the spaces in the building then look back on the greenhouse and through it to the views beyond, and actually participate in it. And as you see in the model, this wall, which goes through the building, is mirrored, so that as you approach the greenhouse, you're really reflecting away from the building, and it's very ambiguous in a sense of where the facade really lies at that point. You see the door panel, but you have no idea of what's behind it. Upstairs is a master bedroom suite, which I would say is extensive to say the least. Dressing, fireplace, 2 bathrooms. People don't like each other very much. 2 studies, an upper terrace, and this is a sitting space for visitors to look down in the living room and look out at the view. And it's really a volumetric thing that keeps working that way. The section should be clearer. The greenhouse, which is glass and goes up over, takes the south light down from the back and also incorporates the stairs, you can see in that elevation. Kitchen, master bedroom, living room here, deck. Again, the extension of the roof to control the sun and also visually extend the space to the edge, ramp down to the gazebo, ramp back down to the children's playroom. Is that section clear? This is the entrance over there, and you go up the stair half a level to the main level, and then it keeps going up on a sloping site. Now, these photographs, I'm sorry, a little bit out of sequence. What I wanted to do is to show you that one, which is from the top. This is looking down, smack into the greenhouse to give you a plan configuration. And this is one of the sides, which again is really a slot window for light and air, and the lower bedrooms, and an incident window opposite the fireplace in the sitting room. And you can see very solid, and the building starts opening up as you go around. But these are a little out of sequence. There it is. Forget that left side. There's the entrance facade. This is it again. There's the mirror. This is the kitchen slot looking back down to it and over, and the studies at the top looking back down and over, and the stair system working through. And again, you can see it in there, and the beginning of the whole erosion of outdoor spaces as it moves towards the view. The garage in there, dining room here, which opens out onto that deck, and up the terrace at the top. We're moving around towards the facade. Interesting thing about these openings is that they, from a pedestrian level, not a pedestrian by standing on the ground level, are really light sources that are screened by their railings and by the nature of the height, so that you can sit in this dining room and see out, but one cannot see in. And this is obviously the opening of the living room, the master bedroom, which looks down onto this terrace and out, and also has a huge skylight at the top. Going around towards the front, and the total erosion of the front, total transparency, and the layering back through space all the way to the greenhouse again. And back around. Now, the reason for showing this is not a stylistic one. The reason I think about talking about one's work is talk about why it got to be that way, and that there really is no stylistic preconception. I mean, the labels that have been attached, the notion of using Corbusier as the sole model of your life, and all that kind of thing are really to me not what it's about. It's really answering problems, no matter what the building type is, and the building, obviously, in this case, is responding to a program, a site, and if you can afford it, someone else could use it and put his things in it. It's really a framework for living that is responding again to general issues. I'm not going to say that again. Now, this is low-cost housing, 560 units in Rochester, and the site, as you can see, was not only a muddy site, but it was also a bowl. It bowls down that way, and it also slopes down that way. This was the first public housing work we've done, and what we tried to answer here was to design units that range from efficiency apartments, which is a single room, kitchen and bath, to 4-bedroom townhouses with a mean building cost of $14,500 per unit. Now that in the East and for so-called fancy architects is like an impossible kind of budget. And as we found out since, and as we're building this, we realized that the builders who are building it also think it's an impossible budget in a way, and are trying to substitute us to death on certain sort of major decisions, but it's a big fight. I mean, when you're dealing with developer owners, you obviously have that supervision phase in a very desperate sort of condition, because you have no leverage except the appeal to one's conscience, right? So it's a problem. But the design intent, and they're actually building it for that money, they're not making the profit they thought they were going to make, is clear. And what we sort of did was to say that what's wrong with public housing? Why has it been unsuccessful? And to do some research. And we researched the European prototypes all the way from Marseille to Shadrach Wood's and Candelas's work in Morocco. We researched the United States buildings. And what's interesting is that what we found was that the amenities in the unit, the particular unit, which is the private domain of the user, was the thing that was lacking. Is that the units per se in architect-designed housing was the thing that never was really resolved. And we made a sort of a diagram research, which was also a way of presenting intent, that started at the unit, then reapplied that to an overall site idea related to climate, parking, and certain requirements, and got to the center of the thing. Simply, we said that the unit in a density like this should have a public side and a private side, that all living spaces are private and all service spaces are public. And you enter that side, that's where the sidewalks are, that's where the cars are, and you proceed again, like the house before and the house before that, from a layering system of public to private, site-related, same extension, same amenities, but reapplied to a different condition. The other thing we found was that given a site which has topographical constraints, which is a bowl in two directions, a sloping site in two directions, the idea of a grid, or the idea of a sort of ordered device for disposing buildings, or one building, which we sort of feel it is, was interesting because the site gave the variation to all the spaces and the silhouette of the project because of its third dimension. In other words, it's not just taking a grid and putting it on a flat site, it's taking a grid and applying it to vertical conditions and seeing what happens to the grid as it moves across the site. Obviously giving unexpected variation and a tremendous sense of enclosure as you pass by. Now, the other interesting thing was that none of the surrounding people wanted this project for the same old reasons that we all know. And the whole presentation and the whole thinking about what the place was going to look like was to say that it would be terrific if, because of the site sloping, that you never saw a car parked and you never saw road, and that what you really saw was a hill town, conceptually, of green and white and a texture of buildings overlaid on buildings, so that what you really saw was a major sort of object that had no notation of project or the notations of housing, but a thing in the landscape that as you drove around it you perceived as a stepping up sort of building, which didn't offer those unsightly and worrisome conditions. So what we said, taking the car then, and in Rochester the requirement was that no front door could be more than 100 feet from the car because of snow and so forth, that the whole notion of circulation became an issue. Is that we said if we could park the living cars, the people that dwelled in this area, undercover, and circulate undercover, and park the guests outside, that would be a fantastic plus. So that the townhouses, which are organized on a muse system, off the circulation system, the red obviously public, the white private, the yellow pedestrian movement, were organized perpendicular to the street system. The flats were all organized on the upper level or the second level so that they had overviews over the green spaces, and they weren't on the road system or the pedestrian circulation system, but above it. And this offered obviously the opportunity to park undercover and to walk undercover to your unit. The stair systems relate to that. And so these are diagrams, right? I mean, these are the intent, what you'd like to try to do. And you make them more, you overlay them again as a system, and you say the red again is public, this is a muse, this is a street, this is a road, and these are green spaces, which vary in dimension and obviously in their slope. But on the whole site, any child and any mother or or any pedestrian can walk through the whole site through this network of green spaces without ever crossing a street. That's the lower plan showing the parking and the pedestrian. That's the upper plan simply showing white for living spaces, red for service spaces. Applying that sort of neighborhood to the site, developing a ring road with 4 streets named after our various children, by the way, which is kind of wild. Everybody's going to say, where'd you get those names for streets? That's a California thing. You overlay the car, and you contain the car in its enclosure, which is a hard enclosure. Obviously, again, in that diagram, facing the yellow and the parking slots, and they're cul-de-sacs which require rerouting. And these big spaces in here are the guest parking and the turnarounds and the fire truck lanes and so forth. And the grid, or this building, is working townhouses, elderly, community buildings, small community buildings at the end, lounges and so forth, and a major community center, which was a gesture to the neighborhood, that other people in the neighborhood might want to participate in that, and everything feeding in a pedestrian situation to that. And obviously here, the green space is working through. Okay, I can zip this now. That's the model as an aerial view. And you can see basically here that what's interesting is that 560 units on 43 acres, we have a 9% ground coverage. It means that actual massive buildings that touch the ground are only 9%, and the whole project is 2 stories high. And that affords, obviously, one to really reclaim 43 acres. You're demising it, but you still feel the entire site. Those are diagrams of unit count and so forth as you go through. These are blow-up plans of a single street. The lower plan showing the circulation system as it runs through, the parking undercover, the stairs up to the flats, the mews. Every mews has a living dining room, kitchen, opposite the entrance, and an outside terrace with a full height glass thing which opens across. The dimension here is about 130 feet. So that in each green there is a sub-identification, and then they all go together. And from each unit you see different, either up or down or over. And that system sort of runs through. So on the ground, if you're driving and you're walking in here, it's really a parking, car, hard aesthetic. And then on the second level, these are all the flat units and the upper portion of the townhouses that simply wrap around through the site and interconnect and make the single building. And this is that's the kind of thing it actually looks like. It's under construction now, and I forgot to bring the construction photographs, which would have been interesting. The way we built it was we investigated every single panel system you can imagine, and what we came up with finally, because of technology and craft, was a stick-built, in other words, a wood frame system of stucco panels, where the expansion joints of the stucco were integrated with the windows, doors, and it's really a panelized system of on-site application, which is very successful. If you keep the panels in stucco small enough, you don't get the cracking and you don't get the kind of problems you usually have. And the whole skin of these buildings was sort of rigorously researched, both in terms of economics and in terms of application. And it's interesting, stucco is one of the oldest materials we know, and it's the one that proved to be the most adaptable for this situation. All right, this is student housing. Different kind of problem. This was a campus in Purchase, New York. The basic master plan is Ed Barnes, who has a reputation in some circles. What he did here is shocking to me. And a 20th century performing arts college, which has a Beaux-Arts plan, is symmetrical both sides, and the termination of this red axis is an air conditioning plant is a comment on what's happening, you know. But anyway, the idea, the organization of this campus is that unfortunately the academic center, and he being very generous because he couldn't do all the buildings, set up a street system across which he gave to other architects like Bob Venturi, Philip Johnson, and Paul Rudolph, and all that. And the only stipulation he made was that every building had to be made out of the same brick. Now, that's not a problem for Venturi because he liked that. It's a problem for certain kinds of buildings, however, right? I mean, brick is a very strange material. And the way Ed Barnes uses brick, which is why he thought it was a universal application, was that he always sticks brick on top of steel and it treats it like paint. Paul Rudolph uses brick in a very different way where he cantilevers brick 50 feet. And other people, you know, are trying. So what's happened here is that you have a World's Fair of brick. How many different ways can I do it, right? Well, we were sort of lucky. We weren't in that academic center, which is really a very hard, very urban, very scaleless place. I mean, it is really incredible how there's absolutely no articulation and no breakdown in these buildings. To the degree, you can imagine it, all the paving is brick, all the walls, everything is brick. He even controlled the window mullion color as being brick, and the brick is almost black. So it's kind of wild. It's a pretty dark place. The other thing that's interesting as a master planner is that a performing arts school, which has 3 theaters, has a music building, has art studios which require light and so forth, is a tremendous kind of problem. And the site was a few hundred acre old farm, beautiful rolling meadows. The only problem is that the Westchester Airport is contiguous. So that to say that there's an acoustical problem in the theaters, or potentially in the theaters, is an understatement. And what he had to do, which is, if you take site planning as a part of the process and as a response to conditions, a unique condition being jet plane noise, the question is whether you would, first of all, buy that site for a performing arts college. Once you have it, the question is, how do you really make theaters? Do you really make them as objects above ground, or do you rethink the whole organization of a theater space? If we know theater spaces, you know that it's an enclosure, no natural light in the space itself, a totally hermetically sealed and controlled volume, and obviously using the land as a buffer rather than making 2 complete shells of the building. That's what he ultimately had to do. All the theaters are double walled with a 4-foot airspace in between, so you're paying double for the building to get what is really a preconception of order on a rolling site. That's the question. Anyway, our student housing, 850 students, is that and that. And what we really did is to turn our backs to the campus at large and to say that what was vital about this site, and we were going to reclaim it, was the open fields, the sun, and to try to design a building which programmatically was very rigorous, had an 18-month construction schedule, a $12 million job, and to try to design it for a budget which was much lower, obviously, than the academic campus, and to use Ed Barnes' brick. That's a problem. We researched all the techniques of sort of normal construction and could not price the building out. And we discovered a brick, a clay product rather, which was 16 inches in length, 8 to 12 inches in depth, that had a hollow core built into it, that had weeping joints inside it, and it was a material that you could lay up. It was self-finishing both sides, it was thermal, and it was watertight, because if the water got through the mortar, it would weep down in the holes internal to the brick. And it really became a systems operation, therefore. We conceived of a process of building this building as a legitimate bearing wall building, precast floors, precast stairs, precast window assembly, and to in fact design a frame of masonry in which a second system of finishers come in and plug in rooms, toilets, plumbing, and so forth and so on. And it's interesting, you just look at this plan. That's the lower floor plan, which is the whole dining hall student union complex. And the gray is a corridor which runs throughout the building. This thing over here is the master's house. Each one of these is a recreation space, and there are 4 of them for the 4 colleges, and they denote the entrances inside. And this is the more accurate plan. This is the plan which says that the whole entrance system to this complex is internal, that you come through at 2 points. From the commuter parking system here, you come up on a bridge and puncture the space, and from the academic campus, you come through a ramp there, and you circulate around a berm inside the site, and the field and the trees are left natural, and the whole site is opening out to the view. The other thing to look at is that every 25 feet, there's a bearing wall, right, like that. And that on top of that, there are precast planks which span across and make the floor. So that the whole system of construction, once the foundation was finished, was to get 100 masons and start here and lay up the walls as you went around. As soon as they got 4 panels laid up, the precast trucks would come in, and the crane would start dropping the precast panels, following them around the U, right? So to meet the construction schedule, this bar was finished first in time for the first year's opening, and the other 2 bars in the dining hall were finished second. And the interesting thing is, you all know how to make chipboard models, and it really is a building made that way. It's setting up bearing walls, crossing them with pieces of cardboard or precast plank, setting up the next wall, crossing them again, and then filling in the horizontal bands with this same material, making brick lintels out of them that span the full 25 feet, and then coming in and putting in the assemblage of work. Now, the only thing we could get out of this program, which is, by the way, obsolete, the program is no longer in use. We're now devising with the Dormitory Authority a whole new way of student housing, which is really apartments, which offer more amenities, more privacy, more choice. But within this context, there are corridor rooms, there are 8-man suites, 6-man suites, and a few scattered singles. Now, that was the choice, or the extent of the choice we could get. There are also lounges spotted throughout this thing. This is a seminar room which is used as classrooms now until the rest of the college is finished, and they denote the entrance system, which is a vertical thing, and also obviously the corridors interconnect as a horizontal circulation system. And that, again, is the student union building, which is used by everybody on the campus, so that everyone ultimately has to come in and participate in this space. And the whole dining idea was to have a big dining hall and then smaller sub-dining spaces as you went around, from 150 people down to rooms that seat 10. Again, offering some semblance of choice and not so institutionalized. That's the floors going around. This is the top floor, which is really the cornice to the building, very straight. All you read is the stair tiles coming through, and you read all the things dropping off vertically, so that as you see the building, you read the top as a constant reference as the land sloping away. The building gets higher, only gets higher as it addresses the land. Very similar again to the housing project before as a principle. A section and elevation through the center space. This is a component drawing showing the organization of the rooms, the berm, and each element that went into fixing. You can see here a notation of bearing wall running through, precast lintel spanning 25 feet, window system, center mullion, which takes the sheetrock system or the plaster system behind it, all just assembled on the job, brought in trucks and assembled. That's an isometric of the way it's supposed to look, and that's what it looks like. Now, you won't see it yet, but the scale of these bricks are 4 times a normal brick. I mean, just in elevation. And what's interesting about them is that, and by using forms like this is that this building reads much lighter in color and in context because the shadows going around curves and the articulation of the building itself is not so rigorously box-like like the other buildings on the campus, that the building really does generate some light. And by making a big outdoor space, which all the major spaces and half the rooms obviously look into and all the entrance systems, we really are creating a college or a subsystem, building village in a campus which is terribly rigorous and sort of, well, I don't want to say not human, but it's not removable, so that any of doors and drywall. And this is the corridor where the walls break and the precast lintels, these little precast beams here, step down the corridor, which you can see here, are the way that you get the system crossing, right? So that you have a bearing wall system and it goes down. And this is really the vocabulary. And what's interesting, which I don't have a slide of, is when it was built, all you saw were the walls and the metal work going in together. So all the door frames and door panels and everything went in with the walls. They were integral, which was a finished material, right? The walls are the finished inside. And then that next group of all these doors went in with the wall. Then the next series of construction people came in, the finishers, and applied the demising of the spaces. It was terrific when they didn't have anything in it, just the walls, the windows, and the whole thing was open. It would have been great to let the students do their own rooms or their own environment, but don't like this. But the dormitory authority wouldn't have it, right? You know. But and this is getting to the dining hall, which is an object in that space, attempting to modulate it and attempting to obviously give it a reference and direction. So whenever you're around in there, and it's pretty vast. I mean, it's 500 feet wide from building to building. Is that you are relating to an object which tells you where you are. This is getting closer to it. And this is the extension of the dining room floor coming out to a terrace, faces south, and the lounges and student activity facilities as it goes up. From the side, again, exposing the corner. You can see the scale of people in there. This is the entrance from the berm level and the skylit stair going down to the dining room, and this is the dining room shaft, which is 50 feet high. The skylit, clear story lit all the way around, lights the dining space below, also open out to the ground, and there's a library in this building, music practice rooms and so forth. This is sort of the context of that kind of corner. I mean, you're always looking down through the space, and you can see that the light actually does get down to the bottom. And you're also seeing the residential buildings through it, so that the whole transparency thing again like the house, is that you're looking through space, through another space, through glass, and then you're seeing the building again, which referentially brings you back, extends the space, and at the same time closes it in, rather than everything just opening out. That's a good photograph of that kind of idea. Again, various high and low shots. The glass, just to get an idea of scale, is 18 feet high on that, from that point up. So it's a building which has to accommodate 450 people at a time, and they can serve 250 meals at a time. So they have 8 meal servings a day, which is a pretty complex. There's a huge kitchen facility to back this thing up. This is from the dining level looking out across the fields and the trees beyond. Okay, last one. A renovation again. In Princeton, this was Whig Hall. It's obviously a neoclassic temple building designed in the 18th century, and instead of housing one piece of sculpture or being a temple, it was a debating society for the polite elite of Princeton. very snobbish, very secular, very Christian, and very elitist. I mean, now that's elitism, you know what I mean? And it burned out. Somebody set the pool table on fire, and it just went right through the building. And we were called up to restore it because we have a great facility for classic architecture. So we can get this kind of stuff done. And what's interesting is that the adjacent structure, which is exactly the same, is the campus police headquarters. And that has acoustical tile ceilings, oak doors, all kinds of little funny spaces, very horizontal building, and not as the prototype building, which is to say a portico, a huge door coming into a floor space or a vestibule conceptually, and then going into a big volume space, which traditionally the temple was. And this represented always the major space, the single idea of the building. The whole history of art department at Princeton was up in arms when they saw the design, and we had to give a presentation to teach the architectural historians about architectural history, which was pretty wild. Our architectural history started at Pestham and went to the Domino House in 2 minutes, right? From before Christ to 1927. We did the whole thing. These are 2 pages from Corbusier's book describing something. The one on the left is the domino model, which is to say that given the opportunity, you can build buildings which are simply horizontal platforms in space, held up by columns that can be cut anywhere with vertical circulation. This analysis is to say, does everybody understand that? I'm sure we do. It's to say that then the walls on all 4 sides are flexible, they can respond to orientation, they can respond to view, they can respond to privacy, and it's really a very general model to accommodate specific use. It's interesting, rather than being the reverse. It's not a specific model to accommodate general use. Same with the houses. This diagram is taking the domino idea in plan and to say that the traditional building, historically, when it got to be more complex in one space, was a series of articulate and self-contained chambers, always defined by punch windows, and you enter a door, you have 4 corners, and you have a point light. The opposite idea is column grid, which implies a free plan that you can demise spaces in any way, in any texture, in any vertical dimension to accommodate really the same thing. And the 2 models here are the barn, right, and Whig Hall, floors going up in it, roof, which means nothing because it had nothing to do with, in fact, the space that was in it, because all these buildings historically flattened out this portion so that the roof form, like the barn roof forms that the barn roof really used, and when they applied the barn form, which is a volumetric idea, to a living building, they invariably flattened the ceiling so that inside the building you had no idea that there was a shape up there, a geometric volume which was triangulated and really generated a space. So that when we renovate these kind of buildings, we always take this out first, right, and see what's happening, and use it. And the other interesting thing is that traditionally when this form was borrowed in houses, the living room levels were always on the ground, and the sleeping levels were on the 2nd floor. This has nothing to do with Whig, it's something else. And then up at the top was storage, right? Instead of reversing it, where the sleeping's on the ground, you move up through the building and you live and you get more perspective, more view, and so forth. Okay, this is the model for that. This plan, raised off the ground, levels of space, circulation going through it, and using the roof as a garden. Taking what you covered here and putting it on the roof. Sometimes it works. This is an allegory. This is an idea. This is a prototype. But it's clear the difference and the notion of what you can do with that. Then the analysis of the window openings. The typical closed plan, punched hole windows, dark walls with bright spots in them, light traveling in this kind of dimension, very dark. Slot windows across the space, defining the volume, the light source coming through all the way to the back. Whig Hall was a very dark building when we got it. I'm sorry, one other thing. The notion of a terrace, which is in space, the roof going over, the opening, the trees coming in, the outside and the inside being interchangeable, the participation from the outside to the inside and vice versa, and yet an extension of the inside space to a contained outdoor space to the outdoor space was something also that has to do with framing views, with bringing people in perceptually, and also controlling light. This analysis is actually Whig Hall. Those are the two buildings. The axial implications and symmetries are clear. That was the major organization of the campus through there. Nassau Hall is opposite on axis. The interfaces of these buildings are the same. And we sort of said that the whole campus circulation, pedestrian circulation, is moving from there twice a day and this way twice a day. And since the new program for the building was to say that it was Whig Hall, but it was also a student building, a student active political building that also had a major lecture hall facility for 250 people that was flexible, is that the building got to be public, which is the only way the people in Whig could afford to restore it, was to make it public. So we sort of said that the light coming in there, that we wanted to change the whole axial notion to maintain the axis of circulation through the building as the precedent states, but to change the axis perceptually in terms of bringing light all the way through the building to the back wall and have the building open up directionally to the campus circulation system and expose it. Obviously, for reasons that were always said, it had to be a fireproof building this time, which made it a concrete building, and we had to add 4,000 more square feet than was originally in it. The precedent for this building is the Maison Carré in Nimes, which is a photograph there. The columns begin at the base. The base is set up, the building is raised off the ground, notating the difference between the natural world and the man-made world. The columns go from base to cornice. The cornice is the end. It begins the roof. It sets up that, and it really describes a space, right? I mean, that is very clearly a volume in there in the solid. The entrance portico there, the plan is descriptive. Same notation. This is a model we made, but look at the Whig Hall plan. This was the plan typically as you move through. Stairs banging across window openings, windows not particularly relating to the spaces, and so forth. And it just inadvertently, because of time and complex program requirements, windows punched in the base, obviously describing that it's not solid anymore, but a hollow. Windows punched in this panel here, which is the same as punching windows in there, and also windows punching in the panel over there. Now, Princeton thought this was really a sacred little goodie, you know, that was very religious and very much a part of the Greek tradition. We didn't think so. We thought that what it was about was a base, columns, and a roof, and that from there on in, we were free because it was an empty shell. Taking the idea that we were going to put a new building in the old building, to say that a new building because of a new program, a fireproof building which is a poured concrete building, and to adapt a structural constraint, which was we had the shell was about to collapse, had been exposed to the weather for 2 years. We had to devise a way of immediately reinforcing the perimeter walls and building the building through the winter. So, for all reasons, precedent, formal, and construction, we decided if the building that we put in it was a columnar building, it had its own footings, which never touched the footings of the existing walls, and they would rise through this whole volume and take the new floors and the new levels and the new occupations. So without going into the planning thing, this is the lowest floor, the one below grade, half below grade. These are those punch windows in the base. What we really tried to do was always to make one aware, at least perceptually, of at least one corner of the building, no matter where you were, and hopefully 2 corners and hopefully 4 corners. No matter where you were in the building, you always had a notation of the main volume and the main intent of these buildings. This is the most complex plan. This is the Whig Hall facility. Entrance here, stair going up, another stair over there, which you saw in the model, and the private spaces, toilets and so forth. And we had to fully air condition this building, which is also interesting. That's another issue. The parlor floor, which is the main floor, you come up the stairs through the portico, again the entrance, the whole exhibition system, which you see through from the outside. It's lit that way. A student lounge, which has a kitchenette thing here that also is used as a seminar room and also used as an overflow space from lectures or whatever's going on in the auditorium. This is the student government of the university president's office. Pretty nice. Next, one floor up from the main level is the main auditorium room. And if you notice, 2 columns got dropped, which is interesting. The big fight was to say, why didn't you put the big space on the ground again? The big space needs big span because it has to accommodate people without interruptions of views. So you drop the column and then you re-express the notation of dropping by having a big girder running through the space, which holds lights and holds a way of holding a screen and shutting it off and so forth. And it's clear to me that the form of the pitched roof box that's been reinterpreted in the 20th century is upside down. Is that the major spaces should be high and the closed down spaces are low, which is similar to this, similar to the barn, and in fact similar to the houses that you saw. Anyway, this is a seminar room off of that space because they have debates here. This is the upper part of that office. It looks down through. That's a debate panel, another office. And the whole stage device is each one of these units comes off. Stairs are all stacked, chairs are all stacked, and you can reassemble these things as a conference table in the space and so forth. And there's a huge projection facility above. You come to the top, there's a balcony looking down, projection booth with multimedia equipment that projects out onto the back wall of this building, which when not in use of projection has a skylight that runs the full width, so that when you look at the building from the campus, you can see actually all the way through it and feel that back wall in light. And this is the other space of the Whig Hall, which is called the James Madison Room, which is a lounge or a living room. So what we did with Whig Hall is we put them in the bottom and put them at the top and put all the public facilities in between. And it's an interface, obviously, between the outside and the public space, but you get to it directly from the stair at the bottom. Okay. This is what we got. When we came there, this is what the building looked like. And the construction technique was as I described. We dropped the columns, which were made 40 feet high, and each one of those little niches on it is a collar which holds the floor. We dropped them down through the building. We cut holes in what was existing onto their own foundations, both of them. That's a shear head where a next floor is going to be, and we set up the whole system of the structure, the new structure. And this is the staging at the roof. At the top floor, and you can see the columns coming through. And what we did first was then, this is the burnt marble cornice, which was about to fall off. We poured a reinforced concrete collar around the whole top to act as a tension ring, which locked the walls in, so they were stabilized. Then we set up the staging for the roof. We put the platform on, there's the collar, and then we poured the roof. So now the building was stabilized and waterproof from rain and weather, and then we started to take out the wall, as you can see there. So here's the base, here's the columns, there's the cornice, and we just made a bigger window. I mean, if you can make a window that big, you can make a window the whole wall. The comments at Princeton were that we were taking out the wall so we could build it, and we were going to put it back the way it was. And everybody was very happy until it was finished. And there's the wall out. And you can see, the space, right? I mean, it was really a terrific space. And we demolished it as we went down, and this was the new space. Now, the heads of all these windows set the new floors. So in other words, no longer were the existing windows just spots floating in the wall, but they actually were the reference for the new ceiling planes. And that we left all the existing windows, and we left them as sort of references in big spaces. In other words, they didn't become particularized, and they were always general windows, which were mainly not only to recall the old building, but to respond and react to the symmetrical conditions of its neighbor and the whole Princeton campus. There's the interface facade facing the police headquarters with its windows, and this is the new building. And the allegory is, to me, is that we've redefined or reinstituted the nature of the Greek temple, and to say that we've made an object in it which is obviously occupying the entire volume. Even though the object is complex and it demises its own space, it really is, I think, that thing which sits in the frame. And the building now becomes an object, the whole building becomes an object in space related to campus and so forth, and has the object in it which in the old sense of the word is filling the single volume of the building. And that's the scale. And these are the floors as they go up. And there's a hole punched in the roof so that you can see that the thing is really clearly inset in the frame and free of it. And that's it from the campus walk. And this is a detail of various transparencies, glass block, and so forth, and a notion of pipe rail. And this is the aesthetic of the fire staff, which at the ground level, you see the columns come through, the form of the stair go up, and the stair goes up. And Princeton has a law that no pipe rail can have more than 6 inches horizontally between the bars so that the students don't jump through them. They can jump over them. So we sort of made a deal about the pipes. It was terrific. It was the first time by law that we could do a thing with pipes and bring lines through the building and sort of do another scale thing. So that was a terrific rule. Upside down. You got to turn this one. I'm sorry. Anyway, start with that. The entrance. This is what you see when you come into the follow floor. This is the exhibition cabinet, which looks to the glass. There's the terrace with the object in it, that office in it, and the trees beyond. Symbolically, at least, in reference to the Corbusier terrace in that pavilion. And no, can't get it. Yeah, that's backwards, but it's okay. That's okay. It's a universal building. It doesn't matter, right? This thing here is that thing there, right? Looking, but anyway, the terrace, the extension to the university, Princeton's saved by its trees. I mean, it's just unbelievable the way the buildings look around and play. Oh, just flagrant eclecticism. Running rampant, and the trees really hold it down. So we were bringing the trees back in the building, and there's a shot through this space, standing here, looking out through that University President's office, and what you feel is the railing continue all the way across. Again, emphasizing even in the detail the notion of the big space again. And this is that office looking up where it gets double height in the glass block of the seminar room above, and the view out. And this is the James Madison Room at the top. This is the cornice of the building. This room is very interesting because it's really a sit-down space. It's a lounge space, and when you sit in it, your eye level is all at the top of the trees. And when you're standing, your eye level is way at the top here, so the room sort of rests. You get to the top of the building in this particular space, sort of drops down, and yet you see through to the sky again, like that house, cut out the roof at one point, expose the whole vertical circulation system down, and get the sky. Also, the roof is available as an outdoor space. We made it a terrace, and you go up to the top of the building finally and get to the top of the tree. This is the space, the multimedia space. That's the wall that's skylit all the way across the back. The screen for showing movies drops down from behind that girder, and there's a mechanical system, there's a blind device that shuts the skylight down. There's an existing window. There are the drop girders where we drop the column so that the space is spanned. And you really feel the whole, the whole volume again. That was the skylight. That's upside down. I'm sorry about that. These came from New York. That's an important slide. Anyway, this is the vision of the building volumetrically, obviously at night. And this is the window that would make Missouri happy. The only thing that would make him happy is that it's outside in both conditions, but still has the glass and everything crazy. So we're very respectful to all the disciplines. And you get that, that's an interesting photograph because there's no artificial light except for the existing ceiling light that exists in the space. No good? Well, this is the space, and you see the level of light and transparency, the wall shooting through, the slot window here where you feel the whole wall go through. You see the edge of the building and really the cornice, and no matter how intense the program or the layering of the space is, you still, again, feel like you're in the big volume of the building. I think that's it. That's it. Thank you. If you all have any questions, I'll do that. I'd prefer to do it. Wait a minute.
Or, on the other hand, a huge catalog of components which are compatible, which leaves a lot of invention open to the architect, and as a response to...
We already have that.
We don't have that. If you look to our catalog, just go through Sweet's catalog and you will find...
I go through Sweet's catalog and I have no trouble in finding things. The reason that we can't put it together to solve the housing problem has nothing to do with the hardware. It just has nothing to do, it's purely an economic problem. There's fantastic hardware for doing housing, and there's very good housing on the market. Not for poor people, which is where the need is.
It's not, I would say that you are a little bit over-optimistic about what you can do with components in the moment.
Oh, come on, there are fantastic things on the market. Maybe I'm over.
Yeah, I think there are fantastic things, but they are not really... most of those parts don't fit together, can't be used together, and I think there is a tremendous job. If the government, let's say for Operation Breakthrough, had come into the market and had said, oh, let's try to bring order into this disorder of this dispersed and fragmented industry, trying to see what components are produced and how can one get the components work together. That would have been a fantastic job for the government. Instead, they went back and said, we want to have again total systems. And I think that is a big problem. If you think that this job of the guy who picks components and puts them together is just juggling things around, that's a frequent view which architects took. They think it's not inventive enough. You have always to develop everything from scratch. And I gave you, I think in my talk, an example which the example of Oliver Evans when he developed the first completely automated mill and got a patent on it. They finally tried to take the patent away from him, and it came to a great debate whether that mill is patentable or not. And Jefferson at that time was a consultant or the expert and came in and said, you cannot patent that because whatever components he used existed for hundreds and thousands of years. He has Archimedes well, he had simple conveyors, he had all the components which existed, you put together and could create something very unique, very new. And I think the task for the architect is not to develop windows from scratch, to develop components from scratch, get them specially manufactured. But the inventive thing is how do you combine things which exist and do something creative with that. If you call it juggling, it's...
But that already goes on. I don't understand
fine.
what you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's good.
That's what the architect has been doing. What you're asking now is the architect can become involved in the development of sophisticated systems or components which fall into a catalog of open systems. And I'm saying that somebody might play that role. But once that catalog, once that sophisticated catalog is there and you've identified all of those systems which mill together so easily, you don't need the architect anymore. The architect, in my view, is the man who develops those interfaces, develops those components in a response to need. He's an inventor.
I think what the job of the architect is what it has always been, to translate the needs of the user into some specific solution. He is a mediator between the industry and the user. And that job is not in trying to work out the details of how to join a window with a wall panel. It's more to see what spaces and what architecture certain user requirement asks for, and to provide that with whatever means.
I agree strongly with this whole point of view. I think that what we really need is a big capital we've had as architects, is that we haven't been able to sit down and get together and have a concerted effort trying to get industrialized buildings. Industrialized components people are worried about because they don't think they're going to go through and make a human element. And what you're saying, and what I think is true, is that what there really is, we have a system designer and an architect. The system designer is an architect of sorts, but he's basically worried about getting a component or a system that works, and then let an architect take it and mold that system to be used. You know, if we get the architects together in different designs, professions, designing systems and designing using these, you know, then maybe we can get something done because we get a concerted effort. And I think our biggest problem in the past, and the reason that, as far as I'm concerned, as architects, we're never going to get anything going with industrialized buildings. There's no way we're ever going to get a concerted effort. We can't sit down together and decide, you know, that we're going to work towards some goal. If everybody's too interested in developing this one.
There are 55,000 architects in the United States. If you got them all to sit down tomorrow and all decide to go in one direction, the world wouldn't notice it. The architects do not make market. Okay, but all right, then the architect, that's why I said that the issue is not a professional issue. The issue is a political issue. It's not a professional issue. I maintain we have sufficient hardware. We have sufficient systems. The reason they're not being used, and by the way, they're not always applicable, but in those cases where that they would do a better job and they're not being used, they're not being used for political and economic reasons.
You seem to believe that, I understand what you're saying, in a Marx-oriented system, there's no separation, or there's less than separation between the society and the political unit of society and the government. In the capitalist situation, you seem to suggest that there is a definite separation between the technological and the production of the industry and its political aspirations. I don't see the distinction. I don't see that distinction. I'd like you to explain the political distinction between production and the technological.
It happens on a number of levels. On the purely economic, the demand for housing in the United States at the present time is in the sector which cannot be met by private industry because of housing. Okay, 50% of the population in the United States today who are in need of housing cannot afford to buy housing on the open market. That is, the builder that is building housing can't build housing that you, if you fall in that 50%, can finance. And you're disenfranchised.
This is at this present
That's
moment.
at the present moment.
Yeah, okay.
At the present moment.
And
By
that's
the way,
one
the
type
trend
of
has
housing
been-
you are
the
talking
trend-
about.
Pardon?
This is new housing.
That's new housing.
What happens is with every building you build, even for the richest guy in Beverly Hills, you provide actually a housing unit for the poorest because of the filtering process.
That's been proven to be inaccurate. Because you lose a lot of stock, and we're losing our housing stock.
That's true,
at
but
a
you
very
still
fast
increase
rate.
the stock, whether you build for the rich, for the middle class, or for the poor.
We're not. It's like the birth rate. At this particular point, our housing stock is not increasing.
Because we don't build.
Because we don't build at that level that we can, that the demand is.
But I think it's a policy to say that if we don't, since we don't have money to build for the poor, we can't help that problem. Because
we have money. I'm not saying we don't have money. I'm saying we have the money and we have the resources. We don't have the will. We have a political situation which says the poor will be kept poor. I mean, let's be realistic about that. That's no joke, and it's no mystery to anyone. We're not building in that area. Now, the other part of that question is that
I don't think we say that the economic situation for the poor to become poor.
to remain poor,
I
the
think
power
that's
play.
why the fallacy there is the poor might, the fact remain poor is a spin-off of the fact that they should consume beyond their financial ability. It's not a direct, the first step isn't that they remain poor, the first step is that they consume. And it's that consumption that can be taken advantage of, and they can just as easily consume housing.
They can't consume houses. They can't consume houses in a system where you have a free enterprise system which requires that a certain profit be made on the person's investment. At the present time, there's no way to build. Within our present existing structure, there's no way to build housing that you can sell to a poor person that he could consume.
But what you're simply saying that we can't build them. They cannot consume. They cannot. That's what you just said.
No,
you cannot provide.
Okay, we can't build them not from a technological standpoint. We can't build them from an economic standpoint.
You
We've got all
cannot,
the technology in the world.
for whatever reason, what you just say, you cannot provide new houses for the poor because of the situation. What you can do is provide houses for the poor through the filtering process.
It's been proven that you can.
I don't know where you take those proof from. I think this is.
Well, the market doesn't work that way. It isn't working that way at all because the price of old housing doesn't go down like the price of a used car. And look at the market.
Because you're not separating, you're not making a distinction between housing and real estate, you know? I mean, I'm sure that with today's situation, assembly of housing can be that's what we're talking about is the industrial process of hyper-assembly, which in the same way that everyone's provided with a new car and a TV set, or they managed to borrow the money to do that.
Okay, let me tell you where that's not so. It was held out that assembly of housing would really reduce the price to where it would fall in the bracket of that 50%. All of the data to date, and I think that we probably have the same data on it, all of the data to date indicates that if you were to industrialize at the height of industrialization that we could do today, aggregate an efficient market, amortize a plant efficiently, we could reduce the cost of housing to the consumer by an absolute maximum of 15%. Now, are there any other numbers that have come up recently?
This is if you can aggregate the market.
If you can aggregate the market.
Which is proven impossible.
Yeah, which is proven impossible, and I mentioned to you the last time that my firm was involved in a market aggregation study for HUD, and when we came up with those figures that without government putting in massive subsidies, there was no way to aggregate a market, they canceled the research program because they didn't want that to be a public issue. Given all of that,
but that shows where our preconceptions in industrialization lie. We always think we can assemble that market. Let's not tell the public that we cannot. We can produce like General Motors. Let's just cling to this concept and go on and on.
It's clear that we can't
never rework and say, forget this whole process and do it in a different way.
Okay, I'm not objecting to doing it in a different way, but that seems to be held up as the epitome of industrialization. And if at that high level you can only save 15% as an absolute maximum. And the figures that most builders who tried to get into it said maybe 5%, maybe 10%. Fed came up with 15% as the maximum. And that is keeping all other things constant, which is land acquisition, financing, which the government said hands off. We will not touch that at all.
We have remained constant in the last year.
They've only gone up. Okay. At that point, they said keep it constant. They've gotten worse, so that the condition is much worse. If you want to deal with providing housing, and I would disagree with Helmut that it can be done by decanting or by filter down. I believe you have to bring new stock on the market. And if you want to bring new stock on the market, you have to change the economic system or change the land acquisition policy or change standards drastically. And you can raise a whole lot of other ores. You keep everything constant and say
I'm not in disagreement with
industrialize
you.
the product. All it's going to do is give you a little more flexibility. It doesn't today deal with why housing is not on the market. That's my point. Industrialization doesn't deal with the problem.
Actually, to the point that you suggested that I had suggested that you can just achieve it by filtering down. You have to provide new housing stock.
You're saying provided at the top.
What I'm saying is the total housing stock is what counts, and the demand and supply, that regulates the cost of housing. So wherever you put new housing stock on the market, whether for the poor, the middle class, or for the rich, it has some impact on the total supply and demand of housing, because you don't increase the families. What you can increase to a certain extent is that some people have two homes. That's something which counteracts my argument. But in general, I think if you increase the housing stock at whatever level, you will provide some housing for the poor, just through the filtering process.
If you provide it at any other level, but directly for the poor, then the poor get substandard housing by the time it becomes economically feasible for them to buy it. And they're living
Right.
in roaches.
They always get the substandard housing, and if you prefer for the poor a Pruitt-Igoe over a slum, you might be dead wrong. The Pruitt-Igoe was new houses, which was much worse than the worst slum in St. Louis.
But
The
that's
question-
not the only alternative. I mean, new housing isn't all Pruitt-Igoe.
What is it? Substandard housing.
But it doesn't have to be substandard housing if you start to recognize that you cannot do it within the economic base.
Right. If
It
you
has to
change
be a
the
different need.
if you change the whole priorities of this country, which you in the beginning said is not what we are doing,
Doesn't look like it.
what I'm saying is simply, rather than sitting there and saying, now since the government is not doing anything, we can't help it and just let's forget it, I think
Never said that. I never
that's
said
what
that.
I'm implying from what was said.
Oh, no. I'm saying that as an architect, I can't do it. And that was my answer to the question there, that I'm going to continue to be an architect because it gives me a forum to stand up and make clear that the problems we recognize can't be solved by all of the bullshit
What
that's
is
handed out by
implied
politicians.
What is implied with your argument is that industrialization has something to do with low-cost housing.
No,
which I
no,
think,
no.
What I think is something which we should recognize, that we cannot always try to industrialize just for that bracket. We should think about industrialization in much more general terms.
Okay,
And whether
I
we...
guess what it comes down to is one value system. I was involved in industrialized building for a long time because I felt it would deal with those pieces of the market which were not being adequately dealt with. Okay? Low-income families, medical facilities, in schools, those social services. Okay? I'm not at all interested in providing housing for the wealthy as an important issue. You know, I think it's a neat design job. You know, you have a lot of fun doing it. But that's not where it's at. If you're saying industrialization is needed, as Konrad indicated, so that when we do change our values, we at least have the technology, I agree with that. If you say it's needed because it's going to hasten that, I think that I don't believe that through technology we're going to change the social system. You need that in the background to be able to use when you've changed the social system. At this particular point, I happen to feel that we have sufficient technology. Therefore, I think that there are other areas to spend one's energy. I think we have sufficient compatible components. We don't need any more on the market. What we need is a way of getting them getting that which we have to the market.
What? You keep saying we, like we are going to change the social system. I don't think we, as people or as architects or as the industry or anything else, change the social system. I think right now the social system is changing itself. Over the past year and a half, you said we have to change the market for housing. Over the last year and a half, the market has changed for housing simply because we haven't been building it. So in 2 years, when the market is
we haven't been building it.
It hasn't been built.
No, it doesn't. That's not an inanimate object. It's like when my kids drop something off the table. My youngest says it spilled, and I say, no, Lev, it didn't spill. You spilled it. There's a big difference. And we have to stop. We have to stop saying them in Washington. Okay? We have to stop saying they. It's we. It's clearly we. We're responsible.
Okay, then this is
you alone on your own personal basis, and everybody else on their own personal basis.
That contradicts what you discussed before. If it's we, then we are really powerful, we as architects.
We're part of it. We're part of it. I don't know how much power we have, but as people, we have a lot more power.
Okay.
I just have one question. Do you feel that over the past year and a half that the market has changed for housing?
The market has changed.
Yeah, simply because, for one thing, it isn't being built because we can't afford it. So we don't have an investment.
There are obvious changes.
Yeah, well, how do you feel that's going to affect, in 2 or 3 years when you start coming out with this economic slump that we're in? Do you feel that maybe we're going to have a better outlook as far as, in fact, like right now, I feel like right now there's a better possibility for change in this whole field of getting industrialized buildings going than there ever has been in the past.
Well,
what kind of concerted effort is being made right now, for people getting together and developing systems that are developing co-ops that will get systems built? We need a, when I talk about concerted effort, I'm not talking about architects, I'm talking about like everybody that's interested in trying to get houses for people, that don't have it. Are those people ever getting together and talking to each other about what they can do?
Sure.
In a way to get it done?
Sure, there are lots of people talking about it. And in general, they're not talking about getting systems as an answer to it. They finally come to realize that that's not going to be the answer immediately. The answer immediately is to get massive subsidies. Now, there is a new Housing Act which recognizes that, but it's less than massive. It's going to do a very small job, a small amount of money. The market doesn't adjust itself. As you know, it's a controlled market. Mortgage rates are very clearly controlled by the Federal Reserve. What are the interest rates? That's what's controlling construction right now. It's purely an interest rate thing. And I still would maintain that the changes will come because the situation has gotten so rotten that people are going to feel that they have to make a change. The people who do have the power to make a change are those who regulate the market. And they're going to make that change out of survival. Their need to survive politically, there are going to be some changes. I don't think it's going to it's not going to go terribly far. At least I don't see it going terribly far, but it's sure going to ease up.
What can we do? I think that the biggest problem, especially with industrialized building technology, is the fact that it's never been sold. People still don't buy it as a viable building. The only reason it works at all is that economics entered into the picture. As a social need, like industrialized building system is non-existent. People don't realize it as, in math, people don't realize it as an answer to any problem whatsoever.
Well, no one's ever adequately proved that it has an answer. And you may be satisfied. I thought,
how many others are in your position to feel that it has, and what have you done together to make other people believe it?
Well, I'm no longer sure that it does. I worked for 10 years trying to make people believe it. And then I found that what I did in that 10 years is I convinced myself that it doesn't have the answers, not the important answers. And I don't want to put it down as saying that it's useless, but the hierarchy is, in my way of thinking, is getting people's heads turned around, not to accept technology, but to accept the fact that you're not going to provide housing, school buildings, medical facilities, social services, recreation facilities on a market basis. It's only available to the wealthy when you do it on a market basis.
Jerry, I still have to come back to my previous remark. Are we talking about situations existed last year or this year or next year, or are we talking about general evaluation of existing problems? Let me say, ask if, for instance, nothing would be, what would you do if nothing would exist in this world which you live in now? And let me assume, this is a very hypothetical, I would idiotic question, but suppose there would be nothing, and now you are the Secretary of Housing in the United States, and you have to organize. Yes, there is a possibility to see it from this point of view. It would take me great deal of time to reveal what I really have in mind. Could be too complex as something like this. So suppose you would do, what would you do? Would you say, take the craft as they are, take the architects as they are, take the profession as it is, take the market as it is, and now try to do the best out of it? Or would you say, using educational facilities, I mean, we all here are more or less involved in the struggle of communication related to information and education. Would you say, we should try to understand possibilities not dependent on what happens today, but what may happen and what would be more logical. For instance, I have to make a personal picture. I have to say, in my personal case, I have been quite almost always misunderstood what I really meant. For instance, people say I'm Christian crazy or Christian freak or no, you said not Christian freak, you said the other freak, what was it?
Technical freak.
Technical freak, No, I think it's not so. In the Australian building, I have only once in my life in this relative short period of 7-8 years was deeply engaged in this problem. But never after this again. I did many other things, and I'm more interested in building, building, quote unquote building, and I'm using I would say my world is dictated by political